Welcome back to Taiwan versus the world. Today we will analyze the media treatment of the ongoing diplomatic row between China and Japan over Taiwan. With two other journalists, Klaus Bardenhagen and Jojje Olsson, we will look at how China turned Sanae Takaichi's comment on Taiwan into a battle of narratives, how Beijing is distorting the situation, and why it is not as effective as they wish it were. We will also speak with Ngern and Michael Turton about a major issue that is too often overlooked in Taiwan: how low wages and the rising cost of living have become a national security issue for the country. And now, let's start with a little trip around Japan. So today to discuss not only what happened around Sanae Takaichi, but also the way the media treated it, we have Klaus Bardenhagen and Jojje Olsson. Am I pronouncing it right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Jojje.
perfect. I would ask both of you to introduce yourself. Klaus first, maybe?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Klaus Bardenhagen. I'm a German freelance reporter and I've been living in Taiwan since 2009 and trying to make the people in Germany understand Taiwan a bit better and what's going on here.
And I'm a Swedish journalist and author. I've been living in Taiwan since 2016 and I report for Swedish media. And I was also in Beijing for 8 years before that.
So we all observed, of course, what happened when Sanae Takaichi declared in front of the Japanese Diet that Taiwan contingency is a national security problem for Japan. Pretty much that's what she said. Would you both like to come back on this and comment again on what she has said, actually why she did that?
So what she said was that conflict over Taiwan or a Chinese attack against Taiwan, including even a blockade, would constitute an existential threat to Japan. And according to Japanese law, that means that the SDF, the Japanese military, could involve itself in such a conflict. It's the key here is the framing of an existential threat, because that takes away the restrictions on the Japanese military not to act outside of Japan's national borders. So by saying that, she kind of hinted that Japan would likely be involved if China attacks Taiwan, and that's why it was so sensitive for China.
And also, it was the first time that an acting Japanese prime minister so clearly made the connection between Taiwan's safety and Japanese existential interests. For example, Shinzo Abe, I think it was in 2021, thereabouts. He said that a Taiwan emergency is also a Japan emergency, but that was when he already had left office. And now for the acting prime minister to take a stance on Taiwan and basically say we are not going to just stand by and watch what's happening right outside our borders was the new quality of this statement.
Yeah, exactly.
So before we move on to China's reaction to it and the escalation of the situation and how it was treated, let's take the opportunity actually to analyze a bit more what she has done, because there's been a lot of knee-jerk reaction to it, and we are trying to not do that, to go a bit deeper. So I understand you both kind of answered my next question, that this is very different from what any of her predecessors have done. But why has she done it? What prompted her to take a move that all of her predecessors had avoided doing?
Well, I believe that the reason was that she was asked and she answered the question. And just as she said, and several as her cabinet ministers also said afterwards, this has actually been Japanese policy for quite some time now. It's just that it was never articulated. So I guess when getting the question, she thought it was suitable to articulate how Japan's policy actually is, because we have had from Japan, as from the US, a certain degree of strategic ambiguity where Japan would not say whether they would get involved or not in a conflict. And this is also actually not Takaichi saying directly that Japan will get involved, but she hints that she would frame it in a way that allows the Japanese military to get involved. So as you say, it's new in the sense that an acting prime minister have never articulated this before, but at the same time, I believe that this policy already existed in Japan for quite some time. It's just that it was not clearly articulated by the prime minister as it was this week.
And also, of course, we need to keep in mind that the one who has started changing the facts on the ground was, of course, China with its escalating military threats against Taiwan. These maneuvers or these blockade rehearsals that we've been seeing on and off for a few years now, they only started in 2022. And before that, their plans were not as blatantly obvious. So if there's an action, there's a reaction. And that's what we are watching right now coming from Japan.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the new times calls for new policies or new articulation of existing policies, because there has been a lot of blame on Takaichi for being the first prime minister for saying this. But just as Klaus hints, there should also be a fair bit of blame on the Chinese military for increasing the provocations around Taiwan. So if the provocations are increased, we're in a new situation, and the new situation sometimes calls for new behavior from the parties that are in risk if China would attack Taiwan.
Also, it was interesting that she explicitly mentioned the possibility of a Chinese blockade of Taiwan, not just an outright attack. So, of course, we all know that China would prefer to take over Taiwan without having to fire a shot, and a blockade or a quarantine of Taiwan's ports is actually the much more likely option. Thing is that a blockade under international law is also a kind of military aggression, and it would justify a military response. But of course, it would look different in the eyes of the world, because the question is who is the one who fires the first shot. That's how you could frame the story to the public. China could say, well, we only sent a few ships, but you see what happened. The other guy started it. So also, more and more think tanks recently have been doing rounds of their war games, and they also focused on the blockade and quarantine scenarios. So maybe she also wanted to make people in Japan, but also in the rest of the world, more aware of this possibility, that what we're going to see is not the invasion scenario. That's, of course, on people's minds, but a more low-key option that would have just as important consequences.
Yeah, I totally agree there, just shortly with Klaus here, because I think that in Europe, from my experience and from the questions that my readers or my editors or other people in Europe that I meet, like European politicians and so on, they would often ask, when will China invade Taiwan, and how should Europe behave if China invades Taiwan? That there are several steps before an invasion on an escalatory ladder. Blockade is something that is more likely, according to many researchers, to happen first. And then even in Europe, we need to discuss how should we act if there is a blockade or a customs quarantine, and not only an invasion, since an invasion is not the most likely scenario. So I think it's good that a Japanese leader articulates this, and I think European leaders should also start to talk about how would Europe behave if there was a blockade and not only invasion.
This is very interesting indeed, yes, that you mentioned. You were very right to point out that part of the statement made by Sanae Takaichi is to include also the possibility of a blockade. The conversation we have today is very interesting because the three of us actually are media professionals, so I meet also with the same question as you, that you meet all the time, which is, when will China attack Taiwan? And my answer, sometimes I make this big answer. I say I'm going to give you the only true exact answer to this question, which is I don't know. And then I point out, well, anybody else who gives you another answer is wrong, because we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. And it's interesting in a way that the answer given by Mrs. Takaichi was to envision every possible scenario. And from what you say, Jojje, because you started by saying she said it because she was asked. So should we understand that nobody asked asked her before? Nobody at the Diet asked any prime minister about this before then?
I believe she did not get that particular question before. It is possible that other prime ministers before her got it. I'm not 100% sure on that. But since there is now a new situation where China is increasing its threats against Taiwan and also even against Japan, with military exercises and so on in the area. I think the combination of getting a question at this moment and the increasing threat from China makes it more relevant than before for a Japanese leader to articulate the actual policy.
It's definitely a timely declaration to make for Mrs. Takaichi. And the answer, of course, was exactly what we would have expected. Or maybe not, because actually we were observing, a lot of us, that China has been reining in a bit its wolf warrior diplomacy. And here we see it exploding once more. Some says this is because the consul just wanted to shine in the eyes of Xi Jinping. But what do they hope to get out of that? What do they hope to get when they are telling the Japanese people that they're going to behead their prime minister?
Statements like that coming from Chinese officials, you never quite know, are they being directed more at their domestic audience or at their party leaders, or do they want to make an impression in the rest of the world? I mean, they should know by now that this kind of wolf warrior statements makes Chinese policy look bad in the eyes of the world. Maybe they calculate that in. Maybe for some reason he didn't get the memo that wolf warriors needed to scale back a bit, or he just saw this as a promising career step to position himself as the most hardcore Chinese diplomat in Japan. Who knows?
I think two things here is relevant. And first, this diplomat in Osaka, he has also before been very hawkish to Japanese politicians and even to Pete Hegseth, U.S. Minister of War, as he's named nowadays. And he is known for being a more aggressive diplomat than most other Chinese diplomats in the region. So that it comes from the Osaka general consular is not that surprising. But just as you stated, Julian, we have seen a decrease in wolf warrior activity in the past couple of years. But I think that just this particular issue is very, very important for China. So we have a new Japanese leader who or at least hints that Japan would get involved in an armed conflict over Taiwan. And that is something we all know, that Taiwan is the reddest of China's red lines, and that Japan, which kind of role Japan takes in a conflict, could decide the entire conflict. It's very important because Japan has a very competent navy. It has 50,000 American soldiers based in Japan. So this is an issue that is much, much more important than many other issues for China. So maybe the wolf warrior diplomacy have been halted in terms of when Chinese students are in problem abroad, or if something like some sanctions or economical problems. But this particular issue is one of the most important issues for China. So here I think that they felt that there was a need to bite back aggressively, because if they don't react to such a statement from Japan, other countries in the region or even in Europe could make similar statements. From Beijing's perspective, you would fear that. And also, if you don't state an example very early against the new Japanese leader, which is known to be, well, I don't want to say a hawk, I would say a realist, but she's known to be more outgoing in her foreign policy against China. If China don't make a hard statement directly, they might also fear that she would continue to make this kind of statements and policies.
Really, everyone should be aware that what we are seeing right now is also part of a positioning in or in advance of a possible next big conflict? Because most people agree that should China be able to take Taiwan even without firing a shot, then we would not have peace and harmony forever in the region. Then the next conflict getting more and more heating up more and more would be between China and Japan. I mean, we already have the Diaoyutai Islands or Senkaku. Some Chinese voices have been making statements about the Okinawa Islands, even saying, well, they didn't historically belong to Japan. And of course, we have all these historical grievances and just for geostrategical reasons. So I think the Japanese government seems to be very much aware that they might be next, and they also want to prepare everyone for this.
You see, what's interesting is that they did not get what they wanted in the end because Sanae Takaichi did not step back, and we don't see. I mean, we can look further and scrutinize it, but we don't see any sign that any significant part of the Japanese population is intimidated. As a matter of fact, browsing a bit around, you see even people in the Philippines, for example, being totally behind Japan on this. So I once said that the worthwhile diplomacy is a misnomer because these people are not wolves. They don't behave like warriors, and what they do is not diplomacy. So, I mean, at the end of the day, they obtained nothing, literally nothing out of Japan by reacting like that. Nobody's afraid and nobody's stepping back.
Yeah, that's what the situation looks like now. We had, I think it was today, that the Japanese foreign minister was also asked on the press conference by, I think it was a People's Daily journalist, it was the Chinese journalist anyhow, about the statement. And he would just calmly but clearly say that there's no need to retract this statement because this is our official policy. We did, though, hear that Takaichi, she said that she would try to refrain from making similar statements in the parliament in the future, but she did not retract it. But of course, now we see China trying to build up pressure in other ways. So news from today, I believe, or if it started yesterday, is that China is trying to give Japan the Taiwan treatment by discouraging Chinese travelers to go to Japan. So obviously tourism is a big share of Japan's service economy. So by trying to strangling the number of Chinese tourists coming to Japan, they hope to build up even more pressure against Takaichi through the service sector, hotel and restaurants and so on. So yeah, we haven't seen any backdowns from the Japanese side yet, but I think that China hope to create enough pressure, if not to have the statement retracted, so at least not having similar statements in the future, and to kind of create discontent with Takaichi among certain sectors in the Japanese society.
So this is, of course, something to discuss because, yes, we have seen in the news, as you said, that now China wants to discourage tourists. But isn't it what the Japanese want anyway? They want less tourists and specifically less Chinese tourists. So maybe you will have some hotels who will complain a bit, but it's likely that a large part of the population would not really care, right?
Well, it looks like another example of China massively overestimating the importance or maybe the sympathies that neighboring countries have towards them as a government and by extension to their citizens as tourists. And especially Japan, of course, is right now trying to scale back on tourism. So yeah, another example of tone deafness, I think, that maybe you whip up patriotism and nationalist sentiment at home, but I think the times were where the rest of the world, including the media, which we will also talk about, I guess, just preemptively adjusted to Chinese demands and like instinctively gave in and decided to not rock the boat. I think these times are finally well, they're not over, but I think the mood is shifting, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, so I spend quite some time in Japan, a few months every year, and most of my Japanese friends, they would not see it as a problem if there were less Chinese tourists. Quite opposite, I would say. Chinese tourists are not that well liked among many Japanese. But at the same time, of course, just as we have seen in Taiwan, there will be a discontent from certain sectors like business lobbies, hotel companies, and parts of the service sector. So I think that it is a bit ironic, as you mentioned, Julian, that she was actually elected by suggesting different measures on how to tackle the over-tourism in Japan. So you could say, in one way, that China is helping her to solve that problem now. But also in the long run, I think that it could create some polarization in the Japanese society, because we have in Taiwan as well seen that there are some people in the business sector, in the service sector, that blames the DPP government for not having as much income from Chinese tourism as before. So even if a large part of the Japanese society would be positive with having less Chinese tourists, there will be business lobbies and certain companies that will be unhappy with this, and that in itself could create polarizations.
Right, that's very interesting. Now that as you mentioned, yes, the treatment in the media has been quite disappointing to say the least. And the three of us being in media, of course, we witnessed that firsthand. I mean, I can give some example. One that was especially shocking was the BBC titling their paper, "How the Japan PM's Taiwan Remarks Provoked the Fury of China," by Ko Ewe, who is apparently based in Singapore. The entire article pretty much takes China's perspective on the matter. The ABC in Australia, since I worked in Australia, so I keep an eye on that. They just put on their video, the title is "Japan PM Provokes China." So it seems that for a lot of, and there are others, the Washington Post, etc., plenty of Anglophone media around the world has pretty much blamed Takaichi for being threatened with beheading. So like we're one step away from people saying that she's responsible of being sexually assaulted because her skirt was too short. Like that's pretty much the vibe it gave me. So how did we reach that stage? How is it possible that we have all these Anglophone media who don't dig any further? Pretty much that's her fault.
I think we've been seeing this kind of victim blaming when it comes to Chinese aggression towards Taiwan or towards other countries for decades, basically, and it has been internalized by a lot of journalists by now. So, of course, there are reactions when you share and criticize headlines like this. There are people who are saying, well, the media X has been bought by the Chinese, or they do this on purpose. But I think the much more important and maybe more worrying reason is that China has been quite successful in the long run with repeating its messaging, which is always don't anger the Chinese people and don't overstep our red lines. And because China has been treated with more and more, it has been treated as the up and coming superpower by media since for at least 25 years now. And Taiwan has not really been able to push back against this with its messaging. So it just has become the kind of standard way of framing this issue. And not enough media are really questioning what are they doing by presenting Taiwan stories from this perspective. So I think it's important to hold back and raise awareness whenever blatant examples like the ones you just mentioned are making the rounds again. And also naming and shaming. So maybe get them to change their editorial policies.
Absolutely. That's why I was not afraid about naming them. And Jojje, I will give you the floor in a second. But just to say, I concur with you, Klaus, also by seeing it from inside. I do not believe, and I would never accuse media of being paid by China, which is something that a lot of people say, oh, they are paid by China. This journalist is paid by China. This media is paid by China. I think that's a false accusation. I think both of you gentlemen had the same problem in the course of my 25 years in this industry. I've been accused of being paid by everyone and their opposite. I always say if I had been really paid by all these people, I wouldn't be so poor. So it's not a problem of people being paid by China. I think personally, I frame it as it's just incompetence. And then when I say that, of course, a journalist is going to scream at me, "How dare you call me incompetent?" I say, well, you're either incompetent or you are actively and willingly supporting a totalitarian regime against a democracy. So tell me which one it is and which one you prefer. But Jojje, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I believe just as is the case with Taiwan and the victim blaming against Taiwan, I think in this example with the Takaichi, it's the same mechanisms, right? That China has been successful in its salami slicing. So it's ramping up activities like gradually. So we just concluded earlier in this discussion that Takaichi's comments is a result of a new situation that is more threatening than before from China towards both Taiwan and Japan. But this situation has been created by this kind of salami slicing tactics where military exercises are being increased gradually, and the military exercises, unfortunately, are no longer news because they happen every day since a couple of years back. So the news will not report on the increased military exercises because that in itself is not newsworthy. But when Japan reacts by making a statement like that, this turns out to be something new. And then the journalists who are reporting about this, maybe they lack understanding, maybe they lack the background knowledge of this issue. So they just look at Takaichi's statement and they think that this is something new. So this must be provoking. It must be her fault or it must be her responsibility. Whereas they don't quite have the knowledge about the extent to which China has been ramping up its threat towards Taiwan and Japan, because that's made gradually over a long period of time. So yeah, the salami slicing from China's side has been very efficient in many ways, even in propaganda purposes like this.
We agree it's kind of a lack of knowledge at the end of the day, and it's not even that we want to dismiss our colleagues. It's just that, I mean, we would deserve the same criticism if we talked about some other part of the world without really knowing the implications, I guess.
I think you might call it incompetency. You could also frame it a bit more nicely and say it's kind of a complacency or the unwillingness to take any risks and step off the beaten path. Because when you look at, okay, how have we reported about this in the past, and you check your own articles, your own medium's articles on your website, you see, yeah, okay, we phrased it like this before, so let's just do it again, keep it safe. And the strange thing is that in this kind of context, it always looks as if China itself has no agency, because they are only the ones who are reacting. If the Japanese prime minister says something new, then it's news because she changed the debate. But every time China is using its tried tactics, then we don't see it as a conscious decision. It's almost as if, the Chinese people are angered. We cannot anger the Chinese people. It's as if this is an automatic reaction and not a conscious decision to use these means to shape the debate in a way that fits Beijing.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that already, I don't know how much you could credit or blame China for this, but already there has been created a kind of a hawkish aura around the Japanese prime minister. Even before she was appointed, she was called like a hawk, a military hawk, nationalist, all these kind of things. But we have seen that, and obviously also you had Donald Trump's visit in Japan, and she was smiling with Trump. It also adds to this kind of aura, which I think is a bit unfair towards her, because we have seen after she was appointed, she have actually not been doing any controversial decisions or policies or statements apart from this one, maybe. But she also hit back against right-wing extremists in the Japanese parliament. So she seems to be a pretty moderate politician that have the ambition and the will to work with different factions within the LDP, the government party. She's not an extremist in any way, but already we have this aura against her in the media for whatever reason. So when she says something like this, it's very easy and very grateful and very clickbait friendly to just feed that narrative that look at this hawkish prime minister, what she's saying now.
This is something that struck me also because, I mean, Jojje, I don't know Japan as much as you do, but it's not exactly as if Japan had any sort of leftist prime minister. I think like since who, like Tomiichi Murayama or something. Like it's not exactly a country where you have a lot of left-wing politicians in power in the first place. So she's not that different at the end of the day.
Yeah, briefly, just they had Yuki Hatoyama in 2010, and just very very shortly here that he was one of the few prime ministers that did not belong to the government party LDP in the past decades, and he has been out reacting to this statement, and he's also been saying like he's siding with Putin in Ukraine, and he's also siding with Xi Jinping against both Taiwan and Takaichi. So they did have like one left prime minister in 2010, but he was only in power for like 1 year and then he lost power. But yeah, as you said, Takaichi is just one of the a row of prime ministers with similar policies and similar ideas. So she's not that extreme in comparison to other Japanese leaders.
And we are seeing something quite similar play out in regards to Taiwan's president Lai Ching-te right now, I think. Just as you mentioned that Ms. Takaichi is being framed as a hawkish, Lai Ching-te has, since he was elected, been framed as leaning toward Taiwan independence and the Taiwan independence firebrand and whatnot, even though the only statement that's being held against him was from many years ago, you know, this pragmatic worker for Taiwan independence thing. Ever since then, he has been signaling that he is just as moderate in his fundamental positions as Tsai Ing-wen was, for example. But somehow some influential media, maybe it was news agencies, maybe it was some global newspapers with global reach, they described him like this, and ever since then this story has been out in the world, and it's been picked up again and again and being reinforced, and once that happens it's really hard to get that out of people's minds and
yes, exactly, yes,
try
and
to
we
steer the
saw that, huh?
discourse.
Yeah, I don't want to cut you, Klaus, but just this is something that I observed as well. I remember this paper by Jennifer Kavanagh and everything. Like, it was very surprising to see these people suddenly pretty much like verbatim repeating Chinese false facts about Lai Ching-te. It's not a matter of being for or against Lai Ching-te. It's just a fact that since he's been president, he hasn't done anything specifically extreme in favor of Taiwanese independence or provocative towards China beyond merely existing. So you'll have to be acting in bad faith to write these kind of things. And we still wonder why such papers get published everywhere in Anglophone press, yes.
Yeah, I would say like just after what happened with Russia's full-scale invasion against Ukraine, again now we have the same situation in many Western medias that we have an elected democratically elected leader in Japan and a democratically elected leader in Taiwan, and they both basically just oppose Chinese attack or annexation from China, and they are getting the blame in many medias. And that's pretty shocking to see that media hasn't learned the lesson even after what happened just recently in Ukraine and still happening.
Yeah, one last thing to touch is that we see China acting with a lot of revanchism, which is quite honestly like a kindergarten level of ideology about ramping up like memories of crimes that were done by Japan in the past. And yes, these crimes are true and they must be acknowledged. But I mean, like, this kind of revanchism, you just never end about it. I mean, on that same metric, I should advocate for you to be beheaded, Klaus, you know, like your country invaded mine twice. So sure, why not? Again, what do they hope by going so low in the level of debate?
Well, one thing is they hope to whip up the nationalist sentiment in the own population and get them on board for whatever happens in the future and make it seem justified and frame China as being the mistreated victim that's only using its right to defend itself. So a lot of this messaging is directed towards the Chinese themselves.
Yeah, I mean, you could really argue whether the Chinese Communist Party have the agency to talk about history in the way that they're doing, because it's not like they have a spotless history themselves. But yeah, as Klaus is saying, like one aspect is the messaging to domestic audience, but also international audience by showing other countries that this is how strong we will react to prevent that other countries will make similar statements, and also to win over the international kind of sympathy to their cause by pushing out those historical versions, historical narratives. Because as we know today, there's many people who doesn't double check when they get historical so-called facts presented in front of them. So I think in many ways it can be pretty efficient.
Thank you. That's a proper conclusion. Klaus, Bardenhagen, Jojje, Olsson, thank you so much for being with us today and commenting on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One overlooked aspect of Taiwan's resilience in the face of international tension is the impact of the cost of living. Cost of living is an issue everywhere in the world, but in Taiwan it corrodes resilience in the face of danger. We talk with Ngern, who recently published his research on the topic in Ketagalan media.
I am a Singaporean who is based in Taiwan. I was previously an activist in Singapore, writing on the labor issues and wage issues in Taiwan. And I have been living in Taiwan for the last 9 years and have been writing about the wage issue in Taiwan as well, especially on the low wage situation in Taiwan. I have been writing about the wage issue in Taiwan since 2017. When I first came to Taiwan, I thought that the cost of living was relatively low compared to Singapore and other developed Western European democracies and countries. So initially I thought the wage situation was acceptable for the cost of living in Taiwan. But after staying in Taiwan for a bit more, I started to see that there are some grocery prices that are on par with many of the more expensive countries. The housing prices have risen to being one of the most expensive in the world. Even on par with New York and Paris, so even more expensive. But the wages in Taiwan are far lesser than in other advanced countries, advanced democracies, Western European countries. So I started trying to look at the wages in comparison with the cost of living to see whether it is comparable to other countries. And there are certain cost of living indicators online, such as Numbeo, which after comparison shows that Taiwan's wages are actually comparatively low as compared to the cost of living.
Roy tells us how Taiwan ended up confronted with low wages and high cost of living, in particular high housing costs.
I think in recent years, the government in Taiwan has tried to push the idea that Taiwan's economic growth is doing very well. And in recent years, it has talked about how Taiwan's economic growth is faster than other Asian tigers like Singapore, Hong Kong, Korea, or that its GDP per capita has caught up with South Korea or Japan. That meant that I wanted to also compare the wage situation with these other countries as well. Just doing that comparison, you can see that Taiwan's wages are actually even as low as half, and even as its GDP as a percentage basis is growing faster this year than Singapore or Hong Kong, for example. But in terms of the dollar value of the GDP, it is still much lower. So then the percentage value may not be as significant when we compare it in terms of dollar value. And also, even as the GDP is growing faster, its wages are actually growing one of the most slowly. and it's still much lower. So then when we talk about the economic growth of the country, we should really be thinking about whether the economic produce and the fruits produced by the workers are shared by the workers, are shared with the workers, and not just by businesses and profits, because that's the situation in Taiwan right now, where businesses, in comparison to many other advanced countries, are actually earning much higher profits per worker per capita than other countries.
Roy's research also attracted the attention of Michael Turton, who has looked into the same topic.
Hi, my name is Michael Andrew Turton. I'm a columnist for the Taipei Times. Well, Roy is always spot on and full of good numbers. And he's also very focused on the welfare of the people. Taiwan's economy has now become dependent on housing, right? Mortgages are 30% of income now. And so the declining income is going to make it more difficult for people to participate in the economy around them, again, pushing them out. And so what you see among the young and poll and surveys, 104 Job Bank does a survey, annually of this, how many of them want to leave? Like 90% of them want to leave. And the government released figures today showing 660,000 Taiwanese who are working outside Taiwan. Those would all be people who are either young or in their prime working years, people Taiwan needs at home. The only group that they really need to be abroad are the people servicing Taiwan businesses in China and the ones servicing Taiwan businesses in the US. And a few doing that elsewhere in Asia. But a lot of people just want to escape. And this ties into another thing that came out today, the rising age of first child for women is now 31.6. That's a demographic, we're in a demographic death spiral. And as the young look around them and realize this economy, it benefits only old people, they're going to want to leave because they're not going to want to support 4 old people for every 1 young person, as Taiwan is rocketing quickly towards in 20 years or so. Things are going to be very difficult everywhere from that perspective, finding people. But in order to compete in that world of the future where everyone is having a declining population, the country with the best immigration policy is going to win. And the country with high incomes for young people is going to win. And Taiwan is not going to score in either of those categories.
Based on internationally recognized indicators on housing affordability, housing prices should be about 3 to 5 times that of household income in order for housing prices to be considered affordable. But in Taiwan, in Taipei itself, the capital city, housing prices are now 16 times that of household income, and across the country, on average, it is about 10 times that of household income, which means that housing prices in Taiwan are highly unaffordable, even more unaffordable than Hong Kong and Seoul, which also have very high disparity in terms of housing prices compared to household income. And one of the problems in Taiwan is because wages are so low, businesses are able to accumulate very high profits. And there is a consultant in Taiwan which has been working with listed companies, which has also pointed out that many of the executives in Taiwan's listed companies, they do hire their own family members as executives as well, and they pay themselves very high salaries. And in so doing, there is a huge accumulation of wealth among the rich.
For Roy, a major issue is what we call wage suppression, a term that refers to keeping wages low and slowing their rise, something that no politician seems eager to change.
The situation in Taiwan is that there is that rhetoric that we have to suppress wages so that exports can grow. And to some extent, you can see that the manufacturing export sector has grown very rapidly. The profits are very high compared to other countries of same similar GDP per capita, but even other countries that are much wealthier than Taiwan. The problem, though, is that by suppressing wages, and Taiwan's minimum wage did not grow for about a decade after 1997, and even after that, continued to grow too slowly as compared to other advanced countries. And therefore, its consumption has not been able to grow to such an extent that it is able to also contribute to economic growth the way other countries are able to do. And so this causes Taiwan's local companies, domestic companies, to not be able to profit or grow as fast as export companies that are able to charge higher export prices. Rhetoric that we have to keep wages low no longer makes sense, because what we are seeing is that even for export companies, they are earning very high profits, and they are not distributing the wages to workers in a way that is still proportionate. And they are also accumulating excessive profits. So that means that if we do raise wages by even a bit more, or even by 50% more, for example, companies are still able to earn high profits. So there is very little rationale to keep wages low, because that rhetoric that we have to keep wages low in order to ensure exports are competitive, that logic no longer stands.
Most people live in a house that someone owns. People, like 84% of the people in Taiwan and 20% of Taiwan own two houses. No political party can change that tax structure without getting punished at the polls. And that's true of everything in Taiwan. The price of water, price of electricity, so many things now are locked in because neither major party has the courage to say, look, that's the change or Taiwan is doomed. The old people themselves will not do what's necessary. They're the miracle generation. They got theirs, and they don't care what happens to you. Your problems are your problem. Anyway, if you just worked harder, you wouldn't have a problem. That's what their point of view. The wealth will get handed down, and when the older generation starts dying off in the next decade, there's going to be a massive transfer of wealth. But that's going to be a transfer of wealth from people in their 80s to people in their 50s. So that nothing's going to come down to the very young. And I think that's an issue that the government has to address.
The situation is probably familiar to many listeners wherever they live, but in Taiwan it is also a national security issue. Taiwan needs to fight for itself, and a Taiwan with low wages and high rents is not a Taiwan worthy of a fight.
One of the things that I look at when I see those numbers, my reaction is this is going to be very bad for Taiwan's security, right? People who don't feel like they're part of a society that they're growing with a society that's growing are going to feel left out, and they're not going to want to participate in its security. They're not going to want to defend it. They won't volunteer for the army. They don't feel like they're part of something. And that's there's actually a couple of studies that show that when people are not, then people don't feel that way. They don't want to participate. They don't want to help defend the nation. So I think one of the things that we're going to see from the salary issue is declining interest in helping Taiwan.
It creates a huge political polarization and social polarization among citizens that can have an impact on Taiwan's national security, because then there are people who are unwilling to come to a consensus or to have a discussion based on what is needed to ensure Taiwan's security, because there is a group of young people who are more supportive of the Taiwan People's Party because they want a third party to exist, which are able to meet their economic needs. And that's how the Taiwan's People Party have been campaigning during the last presidential and legislative election, by trying to talk about the concerns that young people have. What we're seeing even in legislature now is that there has been no concerted policies that has been produced by even the Taiwan's People's Party to try to address these concerns. So then it means that the inequality and the unhappiness with the low wage situation in Taiwan allows segments of the population to be manipulated by political parties to achieve their wants, by trying to manipulate the unhappiness of the economic situation in Taiwan without actually addressing the fundamental issue of the low wages and to try to reform the economic system. Previously, the DPP government actually has quite a strong social welfare policy in the 1990s, but they sidelined this policy after the 2000s, which is highly unfortunate. And the DPP itself, as well as the KMT and the TPP, they do have very strong business links. So all these three major parties are pro-businesses to a large extent, which means that there is no major party that has a focus on ensuring higher wage growth or stronger labor protection for workers.
Roy and Michael still see some possible ways out for Taiwan.
There are actually various tools that the Taiwanese government can have to ensure wage adequacy. This wouldn't dramatically affect Taiwan's economic growth. The problem now is there's no legal requirement to pay higher wages, and it contributes to Taiwan's economic imbalance. The fundamental solution that needs to be done is that the minimum wage needs to be adjusted. As long as there is no legislative legal means to tie them down to higher wages, it means that Taiwan's economy will keep being highly imbalanced.
What you really have to do to raise wages actually is change the housing situation, right? You have to get people to have more babies. And so because the government solution to one of the ways the government holds wages down is bringing in migrant workers. And the irony of that is that migrant workers themselves in Taiwan have relatively lower wages than migrant workers elsewhere. Some of the other Southeast Asian nations are also competitive with Taiwan now. So why should people leave? Or they can just go next door. So to get the wages up, we're going to have rising minimum wages. We're going to have higher taxes. In 1991, labor got a much greater share of the national wealth than capital did. And now that situation is reversed, and we are a much wealthier nation than we were in 1991. So the gains from the economy are going to bosses and to people over 60, and that has to be reversed. So one of the things that you need to do is not only raise the minimum wage, you have to raise the wages. You have to get legislation going to tax businesses that don't pay workers and force them to work overtime. You have to put in flex time. You have to put in remote work. You have to, and above all, you have to change the value of the tax on the assessed value of houses. Because one of the reasons people invest in housing is that they're tax sheltered. Taxes on houses are very, very low. I don't think the assessed value has changed in Taiwan since 1987. And so what happens is when you sell a house, you pay taxes on it from 40 years ago. You're not paying taxes at the normal rate. And so it's incredibly cheap to hold a house. You don't even have to rent it out. That's why one of the weirdest things about Taiwan is that it's insanely overbuilt. There's like 1.2, what is it? There's like 20% more housing in Taiwan than is needed. But people who need housing can't find it because nobody rents it. So you can raise wages also relatively by lowering rents, by forcing that housing back on the market, either as rentals or as homes that people can buy. And the way to do that is to change the tax structure.
Other items in the news around Taiwan include the confirmation that the United States has approved a $700 million sale of an air defense missile system to Taiwan. This is the second Taiwan arms package announced in a week. Google has announced its largest AI infrastructure hardware engineering center in Taiwan. It is the biggest outside of the United States. And finally, the Reuters agency published an investigation showing China using civilian cargo ships in recent drills that appeared to be rehearsals for a potential invasion of Taiwan. We will meet again next week with further guests to discuss Taiwan and the world. Talk to you soon.